In this video, we'll be discussing adverse driving conditions. First, before we even really get into it, let's talk about who can use adverse driving conditions. Certainly, ELD drivers can. If you're a local short-haul driver, you can use adverse driving conditions as well. What adverse driving conditions does, it allows you, under certain special conditions, to extend your 14-hour clock to 16 hours and your 11-hour clock to 13. That means you can work a total of 16 hours in a day and drive a maximum of 13 hours in a day. However, you can only use it under specific exceptions, and it should be used sparingly. First, the adverse conditions exception can only be used to finish a run if, under normal circumstances, it could have been completed during a 14-hour shift and 11 hours of driving. If that's not the case, you cannot use the exception. Second, the FMCSA says the exception can only be used when the conditions were not known or could not be reasonably known to a driver or dispatch immediately prior to beginning the duty day or immediately before beginning driving. If the conditions were known ahead of time, the exception cannot be applied. For instance, if they're calling for snow, you can't use adverse driving conditions because of snow, unless the snowfall that came was that much different. But let's talk about some of the conditions where you can use adverse driving conditions. It could be weather-related, weather that was unknown or extreme. It could be a road closure that was unknown to you or the dispatcher, provided it wasn't something that you did the day before. If the next day the same road is closed, you're definitely aware of it. It could be traffic conditions, where you get stuck because the traffic condition was an accident and everyone needs to slowly make their way through it. That can add and is a good way to use adverse driving conditions. However, you can only use adverse driving conditions for the length of time that the condition existed. So if you were caught in 10 minutes of traffic, that doesn't mean you get 2 more hours of working and 2 more hours of driving. It means you get 10 more minutes of driving and 10 more minutes of working. Once you're past the adverse condition, you need to take into account how long it took. Okay, let's take a look at one of the examples that would not work for adverse driving conditions. Looking at this route, Chicago to Elizabethtown, back to Chicago, just going to Elizabethtown, Kentucky, you're looking at approximately a 6 to 7 hour drive. But sort of on the minimum side, if everything goes perfect, you're going to make it 6 hours to get there. That means you need 12 hours of driving total to get there and back. That means adverse driving conditions can never apply to a load like that because you could never make it in the 11 hours, so there's no adverse condition that could have made this run possible. So when you're running a run like this, you can't use adverse driving conditions. Let's look at some of the frequently asked questions relating to the 2020 changes to hours of service, and this one is about adverse driving conditions. If it only takes an hour for a driver to get through the adverse driving conditions, do they still get to use the full 2 hours of the exception? Answer, no. Drivers are allowed up to an additional 2 hours. If it only took an hour for the driver to get through the adverse condition, then that is all the additional time the driver is allowed. May a driver use the adverse driving condition provision even if the adverse conditions have been cleared when the driver arrives at the location where the condition occurred? Answer, yes, but only if that adverse driving condition stopped a driver's ability to proceed. For example, if a rock slide blocks the road and causes traffic to back up, and the rock slide is cleared off the road before the driver gets there, but the driver is still inhibited by the traffic backup, there you may be able to use the adverse driving exception. Question, are drivers required to annotate an adverse driving condition when they encounter it on their ELD? Yes. A driver is required to annotate the use of the adverse driving condition. You have to pretty much type in exactly what the condition is. You could put rain, you could put traffic, you could put accident. But you want to type in whatever that is to notate the log when you click this adverse driving condition option on an ELD. Are there allowances for delays caused by loading and unloading? Can you use adverse driving conditions because you were delayed in loading or unloading? No. Although the regulations do allow some allowances for unforeseen contingencies, loading and unloading delays would not be covered by those sections, so you can't use it just because the shipper took too long. Question 21. May the adverse driving conditions accepted be used in concert with the revised short haul provisions? Yes. You can use adverse driving conditions as a short haul driver. You simply need to do an old paper logbook that you used to do and write adverse driving condition on it, showing why you went past the 14-hour mark.